Welcome back to Supply House 1775, and today we have a fun video we're doing on how to properly build an outdoor table. So if you're into doing epoxy art and you want it on a table outside, make sure to watch through this video, and we're going to share with you just a few helpful tips that you're going to want to watch out for so you don't have a failure that's going to be really frustrating, costly, and maybe non-repairable to this piece of furniture later. So the best way to make a seam, in my opinion, and the strongest way, is to just make sure you have a very clean factory edge on factory edge connection between your two sheets. Run your countertop epoxy between the two, put some foil tape, mylar tape underneath it so the epoxy can't overly settle through that, so it stays sealed, and just keep working that epoxy in on that seam. Let it set up for about 24 hours, and you can take a lot of the excess off too towards the end when it starts thickening up, and you are going to have a very durable seam that's usually stronger than the center of the sheet. Just keep it really level, set on a really flat table, and I make sure I give it a good 24 hours to cure like that before moving it. And then bondoing those super porous edges on a particle board top. This is a crazy way to take literally a few $100s and make a really fancy table. Another huge mistake I often see when people build these tables is they use some kind of like drywall or spackling on their edges to seal it, something that's water soluble, and often they won't give that adequate time to dry, and it never really gets truly sealed into the edge. So there'll be a tiny little bit of moisture under there before they epoxy, and if you put this outside, inevitably you almost always end up with a little tiny fracture in your epoxy along that front edge, and you'll end up having a failure later due to that, especially if you ever have freeze thaw. It'll fail totally in one season. First thing you're going to want to do is mix up some epoxy with about 10 to 20% acetone, and don't mix too much. Here we're probably applying more than we actually need. The goal of this is to penetrate as much of the substrate as possible, and this is actually the bottom of the table because we want this totally impervious to any kind of moisture, freeze thaw, even ambient moisture absorption that could cause warping and an eventual failure. So make sure you just work it in. You're not just trying to do a quick coating, pour it down. You can scrape it back and forth. If you're using a squeegee, a lot of times it puts it on too thin. If you are using a squeegee, make sure you work it back and forth several times. Now we're going to go ahead, flip the table over to the other side, the non-sealed side. And we're going to go ahead and get right into our color coat, because we should have bondoed smooth edges that should all be sealed. We do our edges when we do our bottom, and now we're going to be pouring our top that should make a totally monolithic encapsulated core of a table. We mix all our different colors up, and remember, you're going to want to make sure you don't let this over temp, so be really thoughtful of your mixing instructions, and we have some really good videos on proper epoxy mixing. And with this product, if done at the right temp, you have a really amazing work time, so you should feel very comfortable. It allows you to be very artistic without worrying about it just flashing and setting up like most of those cheap epoxies you see out there, and way thicker, more durable, three-dimensional in the end. I usually spread everything with a foam roller. I work my edges first because I want all my surface tension broke on that edge, so that when I do finally push my epoxy over that edge, I want it to really break and fall over evenly. I don't want it to be picking little individual paths, and if I wait till the very end, often on something large like this, it can just be a little more frustrating, a little more work. And often too, if you're doing something with a pattern in it, you'll end up getting the center looking really, really good, and then you'll overwork that edge and your pattern will look different around the edge if you had to get back into the top. A lot of times if you're doing a pattern, try to get those edges dealt with first. That surface tension broke. Just make sure that whole edge has a thin coat so it's nice and tacky, nothing excessive. It should be a nice tacky, fully coated edge, and then after you work your top, you can just push that excess over, and any pattern you have should stay totally locked up like that. Make sure if you are doing something like this that you work your way across the table somewhat randomly. It's really easy to work from one end to the other and kind of jump around, and you'll see a lot more notable roller marks if you do that. You kind of slowly work your way, kind of hiding, doing small figure eights or large figure eights, whatever. But remember, this is almost like you're massaging it slowly into what you want. It's not just like you're painting or anything. When I first learned to do epoxy, I was learning by this guy named Hal. He was an amazing old gentleman, and he'd get so frustrated because I just wanted to paint something on. So slow down, be a little thoughtful, watch the colors flow, enjoy it. And man, just make something beautiful, but take your time. Now, as you can see, I let this kind of self-level on its own. I got it pretty level by rolling it, but there's a lot of little air bubbles and high spots. And that's why I'm gonna take this torch, and I'm probably gonna torch this 3 times total. I usually do it 2 times back to back, about 10 minutes in between. And then I'm gonna wait about 20 minutes often and torch it a final time, just capturing any of those final little micro bubbles. You can kind of see in the reflection of the lights when the torch goes over it that I'm popping little tiny micro bubbles, and it's getting a much flatter, smoother surface. And there you can see that blue. I love how you get the non-metallic blue mixed with some of the metallic. It'll give you a way better look than just metallic on metallic like you normally see, or just liquid pigments on liquid pigments. The mix of the two gives you a really awesome look you don't get any other way. I'm gonna let my main coat of epoxy cure for approximately 36 hours generally before I get on to sanding, and then I'm gonna take a 400 grit wet sanding disc and a DA, meaning a dual action orbital sander. That's a sander that doesn't just spin and it doesn't just vibrate, it does both, and that really will help cut down on sanding swirls and struggling with seeing the pattern from sanding it. So I'm gonna start out usually with a 400 or 500 on my first pass, and then I like to use a squeegee because it also cleans a lot of the grit and debris off the table, and then I'm gonna wipe it down with a rag, get this kind of clean, because I don't want some of those larger grits from the 400 or 500 grit still on the table when I bump this up to 1,000 or 2,000 or any of my finer grits. Remember, that's the best way to get a really smooth sanding job, is to make sure you clean in between. I didn't always know this, and I had a lot of struggles because of that. You're gonna run 1,000 grit after that, and it leaves a really satin, non-reflective finish that's very durable, really nice for outside because it cleans well. And I would always recommend running the Diamond Shield onto this, which is not here in the video, but there are quite a few videos we have of putting Diamond Shield down, and that's really gonna aid in the UV chemical resistance and just prolong this, make it way easier to clean, especially if it's sitting outside for many more years to come versus without it. Thanks again for watching the video. We're very excited to have you here on our channel, and check out our next one right here.